Welcome to ACS's Industry Insight series, where we're looking to identify where gaps in the marketplace exist and the game-changing ideas that will expedite our transformation. I'm Andrew Johnson, CEO of ACS, and our special guest tonight is ACS Fellow and Managing Partner of Consulting at Deloitte Australia, Rob Hillard. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Andrew.
The purpose of these sessions is to provide our members with the opportunity to engage in conversation with some of Australia's tech legends. You can post your questions for Rob in the comments sections of Facebook and YouTube, or on Twitter using the hashtag ACSLive. Before we get into questions with Rob, let's make sure the technology is working. For our participants, can you enter your first name and suburb in the comments fields now, and we'll share a snapshot of the breadth of participants who are joining us. Thank you. I can see that we've got Hugh from Sydney joining us. Welcome Alison from Perth and Chris from Adelaide. So technology is working okay. Let's start the conversation with Rob. Rob, firstly, congratulations. Deloitte Australia has had its third consecutive year of double-digit growth with revenues of over 1.76 billion. You personally have 2,500 consulting professionals working as part of your team, so you've got a front row seat observing Australia's digital transformation and indeed enabling that. How would you describe our digital maturity at this point in time?
You know, Andrew, I've been really pleased by what's been happening over the last 5 years. If you asked me that question 5 years ago, I was quite worried because I felt that Australian business was definitely lagging the average of the best countries in the world. But we've seen over the last 5 years a lot of business, particularly right across big, medium, small business, and of course our startup community, starting to really get it. In the mining sector, we're seeing this idea of digital is going to be important to making the mining value chain more effective. The Internet of Things starting to become a reality. Autonomous vehicles. In retail, we're starting to see that the online shopping experience, which used to be an embarrassment, frankly, is actually starting to become, in many instances, at a world-leading stage.
Fantastic. So you've named some industries and sectors that are doing well. Are there any others that you think need to be maybe moving a bit faster?
I actually think everyone's going to have to move faster. So right at the moment we're seeing a rate of change which is greater than any of us have seen in our working lives. And we won't see this change go exponential forever. I argue that change tends to go up and down and has in history. But all of the predictions are that the next 10 years are going to be a continuation of a very rapid increase in the rate of change. So there is no industry that can afford to be complacent, and nor can government afford to be complacent.
Understand. So professional services, industries and firms are facing disruption just like anyone else. So what are some of the strategies that you have been implementing at Deloitte Australia to stay ahead of that curve?
So we always said that professional services was going to be one of those disrupted. And we tried to apply exactly the same principles to ourselves that we apply to our clients. So that really means making sure that we are really streamlined in the way that we take services to market, because people only want to have professionals doing the things that they absolutely have to be doing, and they want to be bringing the best in the world. And digital means you can get the best in the world to specific problems. So we've been getting better at being able to augment teams from experts wherever they are. We've also been getting better at integrating privileged assets, the best intellectual property, be it data sets, be it algorithms that can be applied to an individual problem and and provide a solution that's going to be more effective. And actually being really open and trying to encourage organisations to not think that they have to have everything unique for themselves. So I talk about algorithms. If you're doing something on your website that's going to be about trying to engage a customer, do you need that to be completely unique to you, or could it be something that's shared with a number of your peers or even competitors because it isn't actually a competitive differentiator? Think about, for instance, the delivery stage of an online process. We also finally recognise that as professional services gets more sophisticated, we're actually seeing that organisations are looking for us to be part of their channel to market. So rather than saying we'll pay for professional services, we'll actually take a share in the final market outcome and be genuine partners out there. And while Deloitte Consulting does far more than technology, I think the technologists and members of the ACS have been pretty early to this party. I think, if I look at ACS forums, going back decades, there's been discussion of how can technology professionals be part of achieving end outcomes and actually get rewarded by that rather than just simply by contributing technology which leads to an outcome.
Fantastic. So I'm sure we're going to come back and explore that competitive advantage and how you decide which of those areas are best for your business as we move on. It hasn't just been organic growth for Deloitte Australia, there's been lots of acquisitions. Which ones of those are really exciting you, and how do they add value to both Deloitte internally and to your customers?
So we've been very acquisitive. We've been out in the market buying all sorts of businesses. And it's very hard to pick favourites between them, but some have been really exciting. We brought in an organisation called the Explainers to bolster our communications capability, because a lot of what we're talking about with technology isn't actually just about the technology, it's about people getting engaged with and involved with technology. And in fact, talking of that, we also brought in a company called Mashup, who are physical design experts, and they actually design physical spaces. They design sets, they design stores, and we got involved with them because we realised, if I go back years and years, we used to design first of all websites and then digital environments, and we used to mimic the physical environment. Well, that's actually flipped. Increasingly, you're seeing retailers and banks actually saying, no, hold on, our bank branch or our shop should actually reflect how our website or our digital environment looks, because the digital is their primary channel. And so we brought them in, and obviously we've been Cloud Solutions Group, Struct Digital, Cinder Agency. We've been bringing in organisations that bolster our cloud capability, network development, network services, infrastructure, because those are simply huge and ever more complex problems to solve.
Fantastic. That design company is certainly great lateral thought and strategy, and will give our members something to think about as we go a little bit further. For those who aren't aware, Rob has his own website on information-driven business. I'm a big fan of your content, so I'd like to explore some of the posts that you've made in recent times. One of those specifically is, how do you measure business transformation?
So this is one of my passions. I fundamentally believe, when we talk about business maturity and dealing with digital disruption or dealing with changes in the market, it's a transformation problem, and everybody gets that they've got to constantly transform. But what I observe is people don't take enough time to actually measure it. Now, transformation has a number of aspects to it. First of all, you need to know what's the future you're trying to get to. So have you got a prediction? And how are you going to measure whether that prediction of what the future was going to be is actually correct? So first set of measures. The second thing is you've got to look at what the friction is, or the obstacle to transformation, because it's all fine to say, I want to transform, but I've usually got some legacy that's in my way, and I think everybody watching this would have experience with trying to navigate legacy. So how are you going to simplify and streamline that legacy to make room for this new capability or environment that you want to create? And then finally, what have you really strategically measured what success looks like for the new that you're adding in? Is it measured in terms of new engagement with suppliers, engagement with customers? Is it measured in terms of staff engagement? Is it measured simply in terms of the number of clicks? Is it measured in terms of the number of dollars? Pick your measures and then track against them. So what you end up with is a whole transformation scorecard. And I'm amazed how often people will launch themselves into major transformation initiatives and haven't really thought through that scorecard.
I understand. So given your observations, how much time are organisations putting into thinking and conceptualising what that future state, that desired state might be? And are we talking 3, 5, 10 years? How do you scope that?
We talk about the idea of zoom in and zoom out. So you do need to you need to zoom out and say, what's the big picture? What's 2030 going to look like? But you know that when you look at 2030, you're not going to get it right. Look, if we're going to get 2030 right, you and I will go and invest in shares and make a fortune. But let's assume we can have a picture of what the general trends are. And then you zoom in and say, what's going to happen in the next 2 years? And then depending upon what you're actually doing, you can then place bets. But what I really like is the idea of placing bets and saying, what's my definition of success and what's my definition of failure, and being prepared to fail. So people often talk about in innovation, the willingness to fail and fail cheaply. What I find is that people actually haven't worked out in advance what the definition of failure is, so that they're ready to actually press that button and abandon a particular path to free themselves up to look at something else.
Excellent. So is that part of Australian culture? If you just sort of ignore the failure bit, then it won't get in the way of actually achieving what you want to do?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think particularly in corporate Australia, there is a little bit of a fear of failure. And so people are still not willing to actually be proud of the fact that they tried a project, they tried something, and it didn't succeed. I think it's really interesting in the US, a movement started up that's a little bit like the startup hubs, where people come in and talk about their ideas, but adjusting it to don't talk about your startup successes, talk about your startup failures, and then the whole group try and work out what you learnt from that. And I think in business more generally, we can actually pick something out of that to say there is something to be gained out of every project, and we should be picking over the coals to get all of those pieces. But of course, if we're going to artificially declare that every project is a success, even if we don't actually follow through with it, then we're never going to get those learnings out. And I think we're all the poorer for it.
Understand. So when you start developing your metrics, you've got some interesting ideas around customer loyalty. So particularly in services industry, the customer means everything. How do you define customer loyalty?
So I think that when you look at customers, I describe it as customers smiling at the edges. And the reason why I say that is customers we tend to find that organisations are very good at getting that initial engagement with a customer, usually when they're dealing with just one aspect of the organisation. So if you're thinking about a retailer who has the occasional customer who buys one type of product, or a financial institution that where they buy a savings product or a wealth product. They get good engagement, good digital channel, one-on-one emails. It all works. At the other extreme, we have these really valuable customers. People who are loyal, have been dealing with the organisation for a long time, and they have lots of products. But the reason why those second group are happy is because they are. Because there's lots of intervention. Most people know who their most loyal customers are, and they'll intervene when they're unhappy. You find the team jump on it and get on top of the problem. The problem is in the middle. This is why I talk about the smiling at the edges. The middle is where the real opportunity is. Those are the customers who are more complicated, and hence are having to work across channels, but are not so valuable to the organisation that you've got a whole team jumping on the situation when it gets complicated. How satisfied the middle is how ultimate is where success or failure lies for customer engagement, in my view, for the majority of organisations.
That complexity piece is something that really resonated with me on your blog. I hear it a lot, and I'd like to quote back a post from one of your posts. Simply targeting the creation and launch of new products ultimately destroys organisational agility and adds complexity, which stymies both customer service and future innovation. So could you just walk us through that and explain a little bit more detail?
So we generally we launch things by projects. Everything in our organisation is a project. We launch a project out there, and the project will be to put a new product out. And again, it might be that we're going to launch a new line on our retail, on our online store. So we do that. We have a project manager, we have a scope, we have some technology. And of course, we all know that we manage, we manage time, we manage quality, we manage the features and functions, and those are the levers that we pull. By the end, the project manager's under a whole lot of pressure to get it out there, and they end up having to make compromises. And usually, one of the things that they compromise on is that complexity piece, because they're not being measured on it. They're being measured on getting the features out there. Now what happens is you put new things on your website, or you put new things in your store, or you put new financial products out there, but you don't get rid of anything else, anything that was old, and you don't get rid of any old channels either. So we might add a new mobile channel. we don't get rid of the processes around another channel. So what we end up with is these layers and layers of processes, every single one of which needs to be maintained. And then every time I want to do something new, I've got to navigate all of them. So just imagine the online store that has a mobile channel, has a web channel, has some physical kiosk channels. Each of them being done separately, and they've all added complexity. And then I want to add something. I want to add a new product on top of them. I've got to touch all three of them. Of course, we get frustrated that it takes too long to do because I've tripled the complexity of doing the job.
So I'm sure that example really resonates with all of our members. The challenging part is though, one of your recommendations is to reduce complexity gradually over time. So from a strategy perspective, what are your tips on how you can make that happen? So we've got multiple business units all wanting to release a new product or service. So that battle for additional modules on top becomes really quite tough. So how do you take that journey of change in reducing that complexity that you're starting to build?
Well, I think for a start, technologists and ACS members are really key to this, because when I talk to technologists, and I'm a technologist myself, of course, we all know about all of these hidden costs. We talk about the amount of time that it takes to solve technical problems, the number of outages that we have, or the number of near misses on the outages that we have. What we don't do is surface all of those costs. We also don't surface the added cost to every future project of some of this complexity. So what we're trying to encourage people to do is actually make all of those things visible to everybody. So explain that last time we did a project to add something to the website, there was an extra 10% of effort that was required just to deal with all of that legacy that we've built up over time. And we're going to do 10 of these projects, and each of them are costing us $100,000 a time. So, so there's $100,000 or an entire project we could do for free if we just decommissioned something along the way. That's how we gradually make it clear that there's a payback to not adding new features, but actually taking things away.
Excellent. So taking that theme a little bit further, there's a lot of press around big IT projects that have been deemed to have failed. With that internal push and strategy, how do you go about developing success measures for digital transformation projects?
I think as an industry we have to do a whole lot more, because the press, the media talk a lot about some very high profile failures. Two things that we need to do more of. One, we don't sing enough about the successes, the things that just happen and happened either without too much fuss, or there might have been a fuss, but we get there and we have a big impact. The second thing we don't do is we don't recognise the long-term payback. It'd be great to revisit some of these projects that at the time were seen as failure, as high-profile failures, or running well over budget, but so many of which just become a seamless part of our lives, and we couldn't imagine not having them years down the line. And again, I'm thinking about the pain that we go through in public infrastructure around electronic ticketing for public transport is a good example, where clearly there's been issues in different places with ticketing systems. And yet you go some years down the line and there's major benefit to the public. Or again, sticking in public domain, the number of case management systems that have had high profile cost issues in the media. But you go years down the line, wouldn't it be wonderful if we actually said, well, how many kids have been protected as a result? How many families have had major issues dealt with as a result of technology? And maybe ask ourselves whether or not we're kind of encouraged to as technologists to overpromise in order to get projects over the line that wouldn't otherwise have got over the line, that maybe really the cost was always going to be significantly more. And I could go industry by industry, because I think this is true right across the board.
Excellent. So just to continue on that theme a little bit more, I guess we're making an assumption there that those who are starting their digital transformation journeys earlier, somewhere down the track, whether that's 3 or 5 years, take out the project specifics, that their progress, their culture, their focus has put them in good stead. I want to explore the concept of moonshots. So despite a lot of investment in technology, developed economies haven't really seen the corresponding levels of economic growth. What would you put that down to?
So this is one of the big things that's challenging economists around the world at the moment, and a guy called Robert Gordon, a well-known economist who looks at very, very long range economic trends, started this by looking at what had been the trend over the last part of the 20th century and start of the 21st century for growth, and challenge some of the assumptions that everybody makes about the role of internet, digital more generally, and indeed technology going back to the 1970s. And what he pointed out was that we haven't seen some of that ongoing benefit that we probably anecdotally expected to see coming from technology. And it really does come to where have we decided. I talked before about measuring transformation for organisations. We think within developed countries, there's actually a role for government to actually quite actively target productivity gain in the private and public sector from investments in technology, and try and reward and directly target getting economic benefit. Because at the moment, what we see is a bit of an arms race between companies to improve the mousetrap, but the mousetrap is still catching mice. It's not actually doing something new. And I talked about the idea of moonshots, which was building on, Google came up with this term, moonshot, to talk about projects where they do something that's so outrageous that everybody looks at and says, "There's no way you could do that. It's not incremental to what they're doing today." It's something like a self-driving car. It's completely out there, and I challenge us as to whether or not we are looking at enough of those moonshots that are going to give us those breakthrough productivity benefits. Not just in the year and a couple of years ahead, but in that 2030 type of time frame, which is what we, I think, have responsibility to be thinking about now.
Excellent. So while we might, as a country, not be looking at the moonshots too much, and given the large customer base you have, you might be reluctant to use specific company examples, but are there industry areas that you feel are making the better bold moves, more moonshot oriented as opposed to that incremental improvement?
I actually think that in the last couple of years, and really the last 2 years, I'm seeing both business and government starting to think about the moonshots. Recently we saw Uber announce that Sydney was a target for flying vehicles, flying cars as a transport option. And the reaction of government in New South Wales was extremely positive. It was immediate, yes, let's try and work out how could we create vertical takeoff pads, how could we integrate that into our transport system. I could not imagine 5 years ago any city actually having that sort of response. It would have been a conservative response of, we've got our transport plan out to 2025, 2030, and not been embracing of it. We've seen right across the board that miners, rather than just chasing the commodity price, are thinking about what the future of mining is going to look like, and how are they going to embrace autonomous mining, not just vehicles. How are they going to embrace the Internet of Things, but also how are they going to employ people radically differently, and how are they going to deal with customers. And those are their moonshots. They're having to think over way over the horizon. I think we are just starting to see in retail, with Amazon coming, the threat of Amazon coming into the Australian market, or the reality of Amazon coming into the market, that retailers are going from simply saying, how can we do what Amazon does, to inventing services that would be radically different to Amazon's, and take advantage of their existing customer base, their existing knowledge of the market, their existing infrastructure, to be able to do something quite different. So I think the next few years are pretty exciting. I think there's a few moonshots. And by the way, while we're on moonshots, 2 years ago, we didn't even have on the radar the idea of having an Australian space agency. Well, now we have private space companies and very strong likelihood of a space agency. So when we talk moonshots, I think we're starting to talk real moonshots as well.
Exciting. I'm going to throw to a quick break. I think we've got a great series of questions that would have warmed up our ACS members, and you must be ready to ask questions yourselves. So don't forget, post those questions on Facebook or YouTube, or using the hashtag ACS Live on Twitter. We'll throw to a quick break and come back with your questions after the break. Testing ideas and sharing with each other, people are the drivers of innovation, is a really important aspect of what today's all about.
technological advancement, this presents challenges to some category of worker. And over again, we're seeing that the workers who are facing the greatest challenge are those right there in the middle.
Trying to convince both my cabinet colleagues, but to then drive the change through the bureaucracy was a very significant challenge.
It's about using the power of the machine that you have, keeping it efficient, making sure that your board is right, making sure that your executive management is right, and making sure that all of the talent that sits underneath that is also right.
Welcome back to our viewers who are coming from Brisbane, Batemans Bay and Thailand tonight. We're now going to answer some of your questions with Rob. Navdeep from Melbourne on YouTube has asked, what should we do to compete in this technology industry as a graduate?
So I think that the opportunity for graduates right at the moment is greater and better than ever. So first and foremost, if you are either a recent graduate or coming up to graduation, don't assume the skills you have today are going to be relevant in 2 years' time, and don't be afraid of that. Yeah, one of the things that we're saying to universities is please don't give us job-ready graduates. And Deloitte is the largest private sector employer of graduates in the country, and universities keep on asking us, what do we need? And the comment we're making is, we know the jobs that we're going to be employing people into will only last a year or 2 years at most, and then we're going to want them to do radically different things. So as a graduate, try to do exactly as I suggested before for transformation strategy. Zoom in and zoom out. Zoom into what are you going to do to get into the job market, and that might be use a very specific skill, use a point of entry, use a contact, perhaps get started in a small business to do a specific project and then look for a follow-on opportunity, or join a large graduate program. But zoom out, understand what our industry is going to look like in that 2025, 2030 timeframe, and think about what your role might be in that, and get excited by that. Do a lot of reading. Please. I think it's really important that we need people to be thinking pretty broadly. There are plenty of jobs out there. That's all the evidence. When we look at the when we look at the stats that we do with you, we see that there are still a shortage of people with skills to do some of the most important digital jobs and technology jobs out there. We do have a mismatch, so we unfortunately have people who are needing to adjust where their skills sit. But we should never feel that there isn't a great opportunity. But then be constantly thinking about that, what that next opportunity is going to look like. Maybe within the same employer, but it's going to feel different as you go.
That's a unique perspective. I think we've heard a lot in the last 12 months around the work readiness and industry lamenting the work readiness of graduates, but Deloitte aren't after the universities produce a work ready graduate. So why that difference? Where do you think that media attention comes from?
That does come from a number of my peers, and we've had some pretty heated discussions at the industry advisory groups that we have with various universities. So this is not an easy conversation. So I'm giving you my view, and it's not the only view out there. But I firmly believe that the role of university is to give all of us a set of a knowledge base from which we can build. And the evidence we've got is that the future of work is less about doing individual tasks, and it's more about being able to collaborate, apply technology, and think about the next thing. Work out effectively what the right question to ask is. Interestingly enough, when we look at success, and if we define success in terms of ongoing employment, the attributes that seem to be most important are curiosity. It rates very, very highly in those people who've deemed that they've been successful in getting the types of jobs that they want. People skills are really important, but not necessarily extrovert type people skills. Simply being able to have an intuitive understanding of how people work, how people operate, how people are going to interact with technology. And the ability to to have more than one string to your bow. So the debate between, do you want to be the world's greatest expert in an incredibly narrow space, or do you want to have something that you go deep on but go a little bit wider than that, seems to be a really important attribute. So that's the third attribute. We call that the T-shaped professional. The T-shaped professional is someone who is deep on something, that's the stem of the T, but is also thinking more broadly. So that's that's the crossbar of the T.
Fantastic. One more question from Robert on YouTube. What might be the most important partner industries? For example, energy demand or management?
Oh, so that's it's really interesting. First of all, management on its own doesn't do anything. Management is only about enabling things to happen. Industries are where stuff happens. If you look at energy, energy production in Australia, upstream and downstream. So both. Upstream is actually producing the resource, getting the resource that's going to be able to be used to produce energy. Be it a renewable or be it gas, and production in terms of actual generation or retail. But similarly, things happen at in our telcos. Things happen in our banks. That's where stuff happens. Management is one of those overused terms. I remember when I was fairly early on in my career, I'd had some success. I'd had some successful projects I'd really enjoyed. And I had somebody sit down with me and say, Rob, you're ready for the next step. Let's think about what your next step is. And I think it's into general management. And one of those steps is you need to know less in order to be a better manager. And they described to me, and they were trying to do the right thing. They were saying, successful managers, don't know about something. What they do is they listen to all the evidence and they then use their wisdom and guidance to direct people. Now, I didn't make a particularly wise decision. I made a decision based upon, or maybe not a wise decision in terms of the next career step. What I decided was that did not sound like fun at all. I could not see any fun in not getting intellectually interested in the topic domain. So I actually left that job and went on to something else. But what I observed over time was people who became regarded themselves as managers, integrators of other people's expertise, ultimately became less useful to their organisations over time. And in fact, in a world where we're growing ever flatter organisations, people are able to communicate far more effectively than ever before and be productive at all levels. There's an argument that general management, as we used to know it, is no longer needed. I think it's really important. If you are interested in having the broadest possible impact, you probably will end up taking a role that is a management role. But don't assume that management role is going to be a management path. Just assume that, think about the skills that you have and how you might apply those skills to a wider group of people. Isn't it more fun to become really deep on a particular technical skill? It might be in data, it might be in infrastructure, it might be in digital channels. And then say, how can I mentor you? How can I mentor somebody else in that as part of my team? And then how can I apply my skill to actually get a whole team operating effectively and be part of their decision making? And then how can I make a wider group of projects successful? Or how can I enable the operations with all of its complexity to be more effective perhaps in an operational technical role? You'll find yourself doing management before you know it.
Fantastic. Another one of our viewers, Paul says, you mentioned excess or legacy complexity that can block innovation. How can you measure complexity in business systems, then redesign and productivity and reduce the complexity? Apologies.
Look, there's a number of different ways. I'll get technical for just a second, but one of my passions, I worked a number of years ago on a complexity measure for organisations, and I'm a firm believer. Anyone who's read some of my material know that I believe in information as a really good engine for organisations. Information management, really does set it cool, because the information asset is what is a lot of the time a key differentiator. Now, one of the things that we know is that as systems get more complex, so do their information models. So when we look at those information models, you actually say each of the concepts, and if you think about it perhaps in one way of doing it is in terms of a entity relationship diagram for the data of an organisation, think about how many steps does it take to join any two concepts. And what we find is as we add more legacy in, the number of steps involved increase and can keep increasing exponentially. So it doesn't become uncommon to have to take 100 different joins in order to be able to bring together the concept of a customer and a location, or a customer and a product, or even a customer and their family members. Now, we know that as soon as you do that, you've got ambiguous pathways. The measurement of how many steps and how many different pathways there are a really good proxy measure for how much complexity there is in the organisation and how much legacy there is. And the more that you take that out, the shorter those pathways get and the less ambiguous they get. And I find for organisations that's actually not a bad place to start and put it up as a scorecard and say, okay, how are we going to reduce it? We're not going to reduce that 100 steps to 5 overnight, but we might take it from 100 to 99 to 95 to 90 and so on, project after project.
Fantastic. That's a good tip. I'd like to just explore our SME Engine Room, so a massive employer of people in Australia. And good public policy can be an enabler, can also be an inhibitor. How would you describe what good policy, public policy looks like for SMEs as opposed to startups? Are there any differences?
Well, first of all, one of the things that we've seen in a number of stats is a confusion about the definition of a startup versus a small business or an SME. I think it's really important that we have a very, very clear distinction, and public policy needs to, government policy needs to make that distinction. A startup is an organisation that has a global or enterprise or a wide geographic ambition. So it generally is not geared towards any one geography or any one or any narrow domain. And it also tends to be light on employees and tends to chew through capital quite quickly. So it tends not to be a sustainable business. That's not its goal. Small business and then growing into medium, so SMEs, it tend to be sustainable businesses, often with a geographically specific footprint and goal, or a very specific market that they're going after. Now, for the SMEs are the engine room of jobs growth in Australia. Make no mistake, that's where if politicians are after employment for the largest number of people, encouraging small business particularly is actually where we generate the jobs. All the economic stats point to that. Pairing small business up with government and large business is where you actually create sustainable revenue streams for them. Large business has the balance sheets and the income streams that enable small business to have an ongoing success. So government has a role to make it easy, to take the friction out of that and to provide incentives and rewards to take cost out of small business. So how can they get back end costs out? How can they encourage clustering? How can they, we know that when small businesses cluster together and are able to share infrastructure of some kind, be it payments infrastructure, be it back office infrastructure, you can take a whole lot of cost out and they're more effective and able to employ more people. We also know tax policy matters. Again, giving them access to the right sort of tax and particularly write-offs and incentives enables them to invest in their infrastructure and invest in jobs. And then actually saying, well, how do they pair up with that startup sector? Because the startup sector doesn't generate many jobs, but what it does do is it actually generates ideas. It generates those moonshots that we're talking about before that can then actually create whole ecosystems that both small businesses can cluster around and big business and government can actually leverage. If we really understand that, then we're actually going to create all of the infrastructure in this country in order to enable that. And by the way, one of the things we really want to see, most immediate future opportunity is around smart cities. Because if we get that right, we're going to create sustainable cities, population centres, we're going to solve problems around housing affordability, we're going to create population centres with greater satisfaction, they're going to encourage people to live and work in a sustainable way, and we're going to create opportunities for business to create jobs in those centres, servicing those centres.
Excellent. Just a couple more questions, Rob, if we can. One that I'm really keen to ask you is the impact of government spending, investment, knowledge and skills transfer across an economy. So we see a lot of government investment in IT projects. They're big, and as part of that delivery model, they need to attract the best talent from the private sector. What sort of effect does that have on the broader economy and skills in the private sector? Does that artificially bump up wages, for example? Does it leave skills gaps elsewhere? Can the public sector have the best talent? Is that good for an economy?
Well, certainly government is incredibly important, not just in terms of policy, but as that buyer of services. And I think being really conscious of that is important. We know, I think that organisations like the ACS are really important in understanding what the skills gaps are and what the skills availability are. It would be really unhealthy if a mega project soaks up all of a particular skill and leaves none available for anybody else, because that will do exactly as you say. By and large, government doing big projects is a positive thing for the economy. Just like government building roads and bridges and buildings tends to have a growth benefit to the economy, and we saw that during investment for the GFC. So it's kind of classic. It's classic economics 101. It's absolutely true in our digital infrastructure. If we want to encourage a thriving digital capability, technology capability in Australia, then government doing projects and hiring into that space has a beautiful flow-on effect of encouraging more people into the sector and creating more capability, and others benefit from it. We don't think that the inflationary effect on salaries is large enough to outweigh that tailwinds of the investment. So yes, there is clearly you're having more demand and a limited supply does cause a bump, but the effect of that bump is actually much less than the benefit of having more people come into that part of the economy. So by and large, we want government to be conscious of what they're doing. We want them to be quite strategic in where they do projects and how they encourage the right skills. Don't want them just simply to be blind buyers out in the marketplace, but they are absolutely a positive force for our economy.
Fantastic. 2 rapid fire questions to finish off with our viewers. So 30-second responses if we can. We have Jarell in Geelong who asks, what skills will be relevant in 5 to 10 years?
Who knows? Is the quick answer, and so fortune will favour the bold. So look at the technologies that are coming down the track, but you can absolutely bet they'll be information rich and they will involve lots of customers.
Fantastic. And our final question comes from Vivek in Adelaide. How is the role of business intelligence developing in consulting firms?
So business intelligence has been around for a very long time, and yet organisations would say that they are not making best use of information that they've got. I think we're going from blind BI, where we simply say provide the reports and somebody will read them, to much more integrated activity where we not only see advisors providing the reports, but also helping people to work out what are the business decisions you make.
Fantastic. Well, that's all we have time for. I want to thank ACS Fellow and Managing Partner of Deloitte Consulting, Rob Hillard, for being our special guest today. And I want to thank you for watching and providing the insightful questions. I'm Andrew Johnson, and I'll see you next time on ACS Industry Insights. Thanks, Rob.